Hi, my name's Doug Pollard, constituency is Eltham North. I'm news editor of B News, presenter of the Rainbow Report on Joy, and I'm here with Bent TV as well, so I've got lots of hats on. And my question is to everybody on the panel. I'm getting on in years a bit now, and I get a bit concerned about what's going to happen with aged care. Aged care is not set up to take care of gay or lesbian couples. There's a lot of prejudice in aged care codes against same-sex couples, and yet all the major parties talk in terms of allowing religious exemptions to anti-discrimination laws. Given that most aged care homes are run by religious bodies, surely you shouldn't allow those religious exemptions to discrimination law.
We started with Lindsay last time. We'll start with Tim.
In the same-sex, same entitlements bill that we introduced earlier in the year, one of the acts that was amended was the Aged Care Act, because the Human Rights and Equal Opportunity Commission identified same-sex couples, the fact that same-sex couples are discriminated in trying to access aged care facilities. On the particular question of anti-discrimination legislation, I'm not sure what the Democrats' policy is, but I could get back to you on that in relation to religious exemptions.
Well, the Greens don't support the exemptions for religious organisations, and we think that discrimination, whether it's through the church or through any other organisation, is unacceptable, full stop. The issue of aged care funding is a broad issue. We've got a massive crisis in funding of aged care. It's one of the things that impacts on our public hospital system. You find that people are often in emergency departments and then admitted to wards simply because they haven't got access to an aged care facility when they need it. So it's a broad issue affecting the community generally, and we need to have a massive increase in funding. But, I mean, underpinning all that, there needs to be we have to remove any of the systematic discrimination that exists that prevents access for everybody.
Yeah, we also support the removal of any sort of exemptions from the anti-discrimination laws from any organisation. I think it's just not acceptable. But also with regards, and on top of that, of course, like Richard outlined, the only way you can actually cure a problem is you actually inject an antidote, and we know that has to be money, and there's plenty of money floating around. It just goes to the wrong causes, such as killing people in Iraq and all that. So why don't we use that money for aged care? But at the same time, the other policy, what we want to put forward more and more in Socialist Alliance, is taking things back into public hands. You can't have things run just by private companies because they're profit orientated and not for the benefit of the community.
You raised an issue with, to be honest, I'm not familiar with, but religious exemption laws have a long-standing place in our anti-discrimination legislation. I think there would be many challenges in removing those. That said, I'd be happy to have a discussion with you afterwards and get more details of the challenges. It's actually simply not one that I've actually thought of before, but I take your point.
Sorry to keep standing up. But I'd be looking too close to the libs if I used that microphone.
Me too. You already do.
You are entitled to your view. So those of you who think that a change of government doesn't matter, you are entitled to your view. On this specific question, we don't propose to remove religious exemptions from the Anti-Discrimination Act. However, this issue is a pretty crucial one, where you've got organisations, the job network's one where there's been extensive debate about this in the past too, that are effectively delivering quasi-public services that are overwhelmingly government funded. The one thing I would point out, that makes this quite complex and that you need to tread carefully is that there are quite a number of aged care facilities that are ethno-specific, which by definition are built on the notion I opened and been very heavily involved in a Vietnamese one, for example, which by definition are built on the notion that they are targeted at a specific community, which in theory you could say is racial discrimination or whatever. So you need to be a little bit careful in dealing with this. I think it would get caught up with our commitment to amend legislation to remove discrimination.
Sally Goldner, media spokesperson for Transgender Victoria, is unable to attend today, but she sent a question in via email. My question is primarily directed to the ALP, represented by Lindsay Tanner. However, We'll appreciate comments from all candidates. We're not going to do that bit though, sorry. At the meeting of the Candidates Forum prior to the 2004 federal election, then Shadow Attorney General Nicola Roxon gave a clear commitment on behalf of the ALP to moving on federal gender identity and discrimination law quickly, and also moving simultaneously with sexual orientation reform and recognising couples. The candidates' responses received by the VGLRL in 2007 no longer mention gender identity in question 2, even though this is part of the ALP policy. A response to the Coalition of Equality survey says gender identity law would not happen until a second term. Before responding, I quote with permission from a recent email received to a 3CR radio show from a transgender listener suffering from discrimination in their life. I was sitting here with a loaded gun, wanting to end it all. I sat here drinking with the radio going on. So no offence, but can you, in light of that, reaffirm the 2004 commitment to the first term federal gender identity legislation that, like its state equivalents, would ultimately save lives?
It sounds like she knows the answer to that question better than I do, and all I can do is stand by the formal commitments that have been given by the relevant party spokespeople. I obviously don't know if there is a fine detail difference between what has been said in 2004 and this current election. Frankly, I'm unaware of it. So all I can suggest is that if there is a lack of clarity in exactly what the formal position is in the current election context, then Joe Ludwig is the correct person to answer that.
Will you undertake getting an answer on that?
I'm happy to undertake that. In fact, you may, if you can forward her email to me.
I'll forward it to Mary.
To Mary.
Thanks.
I'm happy to organise an answer.
Hello, Asa.
Hi, my question's to Lindsay Tanner. 2 weeks ago, Kevin Rudd made comments which suggested that same-sex couples should only be able to adopt children in exceptional circumstances. Could you please clarify what the federal ALP party position will be on the recognition of the increasing number of gay and lesbian couples with children?
I haven't seen... I know the comments you're referring to. I haven't actually seen a transcript, so I don't know exactly, word for word, what was said. Ultimately, the federal sphere of responsibility in this area really only touches this issue in two respects. One is the, quote, marriage question, and the other is overseas adoption issues. Oh, sorry, well, Family Law Act, which in turn is dependent on marriage. To the extent that, other than to the extent that powers are referred to the federal government by the states, it is dependent on marriage. The constitutional power that the states, that the Commonwealth has to legislate the Family Law Act comes from two things. One, the power to legislate with respect to marriage, and secondly, any powers that are referred from the state governments. So I think ultimately it just goes back to that basic question about marriage, civil unions, relationship recognition, registers, etc.